Bloodstains don't wash out of a bespoke Brioni suit, but the tears of a desperate child leave a much heavier mark. When a bruised 6-year-old bypassed the city's deadliest security detail to ask Chicago's most ruthless crime boss to buy her, the entire criminal underworld shifted on its axis. The October wind, whipping off Lake Michigan, was bitterly cold, but it was nothing compared to the temperature inside the VIP room of Tavola, an exclusive, invitation-only restaurant in Chicago's Gold Coast. Gregor Romano sat at the head of a long mahogany table, nursing a glass of Macallan 25. At 33, Gregor was the undisputed head of the Romano syndicate. He was a man carved from marble and violence, possessing a terrifyingly calm demeanor that made seasoned hitmen stutter in his presence. His empire spanned from illegal shipping ports to high-end real estate, built on a foundation of ruthless efficiency and zero tolerance for disrespect. Outside the frosted glass doors of the private dining room, 4 of his top enforcers stood guard. Among them was Dante, his underboss, a man whose loyalty was matched only by his brutality. It was a fortress. Impenetrable. Or so they thought. Gregor was in the middle of reviewing a ledger from one of his underground casinos when the heavy oak door slowly creaked open. Dante's hand instantly flew to the Sig Sauer holstered beneath his tailored jacket, stepping into the doorway to block the intruder. But Dante froze. Pushing past the hardened enforcer, squeezing through the small gap between Dante's leg and the doorframe, was a little girl. She couldn't have been older than 6. She wore a faded, oversized yellow raincoat that was stained with mud and city grime. Her knees were scraped, and a dark, ugly bruise bloomed along her left cheekbone. She clutched a battered canvas tote bag to her chest like a shield. The room went dead silent. The 3 capos sitting across from Gregor stopped breathing. No one moved. How a child had bypassed the heavily armed perimeter on the ground floor, navigated the private elevator, and walked right into a mob summit was a question that would cost several men their jobs, or perhaps their lives, before the night was over. But Gregor didn't yell. He merely raised a single, dark eyebrow, his ice blue eyes locking onto the tiny intruder. The girl didn't flinch. She marched straight up to the head of the table, her worn-out sneakers squeaking against the imported Italian marble floor. She stopped inches away from Gregor. Up close, he could smell the dampness of the rain on her coat and the faint, metallic scent of dried blood on her collar. She looked at the men around the table, then locked eyes with Gregor. She seemed to instinctively know he was the one in charge. "Are you very rich?" she asked. Her voice was small, trembling slightly, but astonishingly clear. Dante took a step forward, his voice a low growl. "Boss, I don't know how she—" Gregor raised 2 fingers, silencing his underboss instantly. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, bringing himself closer to her eye level. The light from the chandelier caught the face of the Patek Philippe Nautilus on his left wrist. "I manage," Gregor replied, his deep voice smooth, betraying none of the shock he felt. "Who are you, Piccola?" "My name is Lily," she said, pulling her shoulders back. "I need $50,000. One of the capos let out a nervous scoff. Gregor shot him a glare that could freeze boiling water, and the man immediately looked down at his shoes. $50,000 is a lot of money, Lily," Gregor said calmly. "What could a little girl possibly need with that kind of cash?" Lily's lower lip quivered, but she bit it hard, forcing herself to be brave. She reached out with a tiny, dirt-smudged hand and grabbed the lapel of his $3,000 Brioni suit jacket. It was an act of familiarity that would have gotten a grown man shot in the kneecaps. "Do you know anyone who wants a child?" she asked, the words tumbling out in a desperate rush. "I am very well behaved. I eat very little. I can sweep floors, and I know how to make toast without burning it. I won't cry. You can buy me, but you have to give the money to my sister. Right now." The silence that followed was suffocating. Gregor's eyes darkened, the temperature in the room plummeting. He was a monster who had done unspeakable things, but he operated by a strict code. Women and children were off limits. To hear a child trying to barter her own life for cash struck a dark, vibrating chord deep within his chest. "Why does your sister need the money, Lily?" Gregor asked, his voice dropping an octave, losing its conversational tone, and taking on the dangerous edge of the street. A single tear spilled over Lily's bruised cheek. "The bad men," she whispered. "They broke our door. They hit Clara." They said our dad owed them, and because he ran away, they are going to take Clara to a place where girls don't come back from. They said her debt is 50,000. If I sell myself, I can save her. Gregor's jaw clenched. Who are the bad men? The one who hit me had a snake tattoo on his neck. Lily sniffled. He said his boss is Mr. Cassell. Victor Cassell. The name left a foul taste in Gregor's mouth. The Castle family was a rival syndicate, running the human trafficking and extortion rackets on the city's south side. They were scum, lacking the discipline and honor of the Romano operations. Gregor had been looking for a legitimate reason to wipe Victor Cassell off the map. Gregor looked down at the tiny hand still gripping his lapel. He didn't see a street urchin. He saw an incredible, raw courage that most of his highly paid soldiers lacked. Slowly, Gregor stood up, towering over 6 feet tall. He unbuttoned his suit jacket and gently wrapped his large, scarred hand around Lily's tiny fingers, detaching her from his lapel. He didn't let go of her hand. "Dante," Gregor said, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "Get the cars. Bring every man we have outside." "Boss?" Dante asked, bewildered. The meeting is over," Gregor said, looking down at the little girl who had just altered the course of his life. He looked back at Dante, his eyes devoid of mercy. "We are going to make a purchase." The rain was coming down in sheets by the time a convoy of 3 black Mercedes Maybach S680s pulled into the Lower West Side. It was a forgotten part of the city, a landscape of crumbling brick buildings and flickering streetlights. In the back seat of the lead car, Lily sat, wrapped in a thick cashmere blanket, a cup of hot chocolate in her hands, provided by a bewildered but accommodating driver. Gregor sat beside her, methodically loading a magazine into his Colt M1911. "Which building, Lily?" Gregor asked quietly. Lily pointed a trembling finger toward a dilapidated brownstone at the end of the dead-end street. The front door was already kicked off its hinges. "Stay in the car," Gregor instructed her. "Dante, leave 2 men with her. If anyone approaches this vehicle, kill them. The rest of you, with me." Gregor stepped out into the freezing rain, the heavy handgun resting casually at his side. 5 heavily armed men fell into step behind him. They moved like ghosts up the front steps and into the pitch-black hallway. On the 3rd floor, they could hear the sounds of a struggle, a man's cruel laughter, followed by the sickening sound of flesh hitting flesh. "Please! I told you, I don't know where my father is," a woman's voice screamed, raspy and desperate. "Your old man took Victor's money, sweetheart," a rough voice replied. "Since he skipped town, his debt transfers to his blood. You're gonna earn it back, every single penny. Strip her and tie her up. We're moving her to the docks." Gregor didn't bother knocking. He kicked the splintered wooden door with such force it ripped entirely from the frame, crashing into the living room. The apartment was a wreck. Overturned chairs, shattered plates, and torn books littered the floor. In the center of the room, 2 large thugs were gripping the arms of a young woman. Clara Hayes was 24, with fiery auburn hair that was currently matted with sweat and blood. A harsh red mark slashed across her cheek, and her lip was split, bleeding down her chin. Despite the terror in her wide, hazel eyes, she was kicking and thrashing like a wildcat. A 3rd man, the one with a serpent tattooed on his neck, was standing over her, holding a roll of duct tape. He looked up at the intrusion, reaching for his waistband. "Who the hell are?" Bang. Gregor didn't blink as he put a bullet straight through the tattooed man's knee. The thug collapsed, screaming in agony, dropping the tape. The other 2 men froze, their hands dropping from Clara as they finally recognized the towering figure standing in the doorway, the bespoke suit, the cold, dead eyes. Gregor Romano. "The Reaper of Chicago." "Romano," one of the men whispered, his face draining of all color. "This is Cassell territory." "Not anymore," Gregor said softly. Before the man could even register the words, Dante and the other enforcers flooded the room. It was over in seconds. A flurry of suppressed gunshots and brutal, efficient hand-to-hand strikes left the 2 remaining thugs unconscious and bleeding out on the cheap linoleum floor. Clara collapsed against the wall, sliding down to the floor, gasping for air. She pulled her torn sweater tightly around her shoulders, trembling violently. She looked at the blood pooling on her floor, then up at the men in expensive suits. She recognized Gregor from the news, from the whispered rumors in the city. She knew she had just traded a pack of wolves for a lion. Gregor stepped over the groaning man with the shattered knee. He holstered his weapon and crouched down in front of Clara. She flinched, pressing herself harder against the wall, squeezing her eyes shut. Gregor paused. He was used to fear, but for some reason, the absolute terror emanating from this woman bothered him. He pulled a pristine white silk handkerchief from his breast pocket and held it out. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. Clara opened her eyes, staring at the handkerchief, then at him. "Why?" she choked out. "Why are you here? I don't have anything. I don't have Victor's money, and I don't have yours." "Clara," a tiny voice shrieked from the hallway. Lily, having disobeyed orders to stay in the car, scrambled over the broken door and sprinted across the room, throwing her arms around Clara's neck. "Lily! Oh my God, Lily!" Clara sobbed, burying her face in the little girl's hair, checking her frantically for injuries. "Where were you? I was so scared. I went to get help," Lily said proudly, turning to point a small finger at Gregor. "I bought him. Well, I promised him you would pay him." Clara's blood ran cold. She slowly looked up at Gregor, her eyes wide with a new, horrifying realization. What did she promise you?" Gregor stood up, towering over them once more. His eyes swept over the squalor of the apartment, the broken furniture, the blood, and finally settled on the fiercely protective way Clara held the child. "Your father, Arthur Pendleton, owed Victor Castle $50,000, Gregor stated, his business tone returning. "Castle intended to use you to pay it off. That debt no longer exists. I have taken it on." Clara swallowed hard. "You paid him? I am going to destroy him," Gregor corrected her coldly. "But the fact remains, Clara Hayes, you and your sister are now a liability. If Castle finds out you are alive, he will use you to get to me. You are the catalyst for a war." "We'll leave," Clara said desperately, struggling to her feet while keeping Lily behind her. "We'll leave Chicago tonight. You'll never see us again. Just let us go." Gregor shook his head slowly. "You misunderstand the situation. You are now under my protection. And what is mine stays with me." "I am not a piece of property," Clara fired back, her fear momentarily eclipsed by fierce anger. Gregor took a step closer. The sheer dominance of his presence forced Clara to step back until her shoulders hit the wall. He reached out, not to strike her, but to gently wipe a drop of blood from her chin with his thumb. The touch was burning hot against her cold skin. "You are whatever I need you to be, to keep you breathing," Gregor murmured, his eyes locked onto hers. "Pack whatever you can fit into a single bag. You have 3 minutes. Welcome to the Romano family." The Romano estate in Lake Forest was less a home and more a fortified citadel masquerading as a sprawling 1920s Tudor mansion, set upon a high bluff overlooking the gray, churning waters of Lake Michigan. It was surrounded by 10-foot wrought iron fences, discreetly placed biometric scanners, and heavily armed men patrolling the manicured grounds with Belgian Malinois guard dogs. For a week, Clara and Lily had been confined to the East Wing. Their temporary prison was a suite of rooms dripping in opulent wealth, silk drapes, Persian rugs, and a marble bathroom larger than their entire former apartment. Mrs. Gallagher, a stern but grandmotherly Irish housekeeper, brought them extravagant meals, roasted quail, truffled risotto, and for Lily, an endless supply of imported Swiss chocolates. Lily was thriving. To the 6-year-old, the trauma of the slums was already fading, replaced by the grand adventure of a castle and the giant, brooding man she viewed as her personal knight. Gregor had even ordered his men to build a custom swing set in the courtyard. Hardened killers who usually spent their days collecting loan shark debts were suddenly assembling a cedarwood playground under the watchful, demanding eye of a little girl in a yellow raincoat. Clara, however, was slowly losing her mind. She paced the length of the Persian rug, her auburn hair tied up in a messy knot. She wore a simple charcoal cashmere sweater and tailored trousers that Mrs. Gallagher had procured from a high-end boutique in the Gold Coast. Clara felt like a porcelain doll trapped in a glass display case. Every time she looked out the window, she saw men with assault rifles. Every time she tried to walk past the grand staircase, Dante, or another massive enforcer, would politely but firmly block her path. "You're burning a hole in the floor?" "Clara?" Gregor's deep voice resonated from the doorway. Clara spun around. Gregor stood there, stripping off a pair of black leather driving gloves. He looked exhausted. There were dark circles under his ice-blue eyes, and his tailored charcoal suit smelled faintly of stale cigarette smoke, expensive cologne, and a metallic tang that Clara was beginning to recognize as gunpowder. The war with the Castle Syndicate had erupted into the streets of Chicago, and Gregor was on the front lines. "I'm a prisoner," Clara said, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and defiance. "You dressed us in silk and fed us caviar, but we are hostages." Gregor walked slowly into the room, tossing his gloves onto a mahogany side table. "You are alive. A week ago, you were minutes away from being sold into a shipping container bound for Eastern Europe. I would suggest a slight shift in perspective." "We could run," Clara countered, stepping closer to him, her hazel eyes blazing. "Give us new identities. You have the power. You own half the judges and cops in this city. Send us to Canada. Send us to Europe. We don't belong in this world, Gregor." It was the first time she had used his first name. It hung in the air between them, heavy and intimate. Gregor closed the distance between them. He was so tall she had to tilt her head back to look at him. "You cannot run from what your father set in motion. Sit down, Clara. I have something to show you." He didn't wait for her to comply. He walked over to the heavy oak desk in the corner of the room, opened his briefcase, and pulled out a battered, leather-bound ledger. He tossed it onto the glass coffee table. Clara cautiously sat on the edge of the velvet sofa, staring at the book. "What is that?" "It is the reason Arthur Pendleton abandoned his daughters to the wolves," Gregor said coldly, pouring himself 3 fingers of Macallan from a crystal decanter. He took a slow sip. "Your father wasn't just a degenerate gambler. He was an accountant for Alderman Richard Sterling. Do you know who that is?" Clara nodded slowly. "He's running for mayor. He's on the news every night talking about cleaning up the streets." Gregor let out a dark, humorless laugh. "Sterling is the architect of the filth he claims to fight. He uses Victor Cassell as his attack dog to control the illegal arms trade coming through the port of Chicago. Your father, in a moment of sheer, catastrophic stupidity, stole this ledger from Sterling's office. It details every illegal transaction, every bribe, every body buried by the alderman and the Cassell family." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "He stole it. Why?" "To blackmail them," Gregor stated flatly. "Arthur demanded $2 million for its return. But Sterling didn't become a political powerhouse by negotiating with junkies. He sent Cassell's men to get the book back and kill your father. Arthur panicked, hid the book in a safety deposit box at Chase Bank, and fled the state. He left the key hidden in your apartment." Gregor reached into his pocket and placed a small, brass key next to the ledger. "My men tore your apartment apart before the police cordoned it off. We found it taped beneath the floorboards of Lily's closet." Clara covered her mouth with her hand, suppressing a sob. Her father hadn't just left them with a debt. He had left them sitting on a bomb. He had traded his daughters' lives for a head start. "Castle didn't know your father hid the key in the apartment," Gregor continued softly, his gaze locked onto her devastated face. "He thought Arthur took it with him. Castle was taking you to the docks to torture you, to force your father out of hiding to save his blood. But Arthur was never going to come back for you." Tears streamed down Clara's cheeks. The betrayal was absolute. She felt a large, warm hand cup her shoulder. Gregor had crossed the room and was standing beside her. "You are mourning a man who does not exist," Gregor murmured, his thumb brushing away a tear from her cheek. "You and Lily survived because you are strong. You are a fighter, Clara." She leaned into his touch, utterly exhausted by the weight of the revelation. The monster of Chicago was the only person offering her a shred of honesty. "What happens now?" she whispered. "Now," Gregor said, his voice hardening into steel. "I use this ledger to destroy Victor Cassell and hang Alderman Sterling. But Cassell is a wounded animal, and he knows I have his death warrant. He will throw every man he has at me." Before Clara could respond, the heavy oak doors of the suite burst open. Dante stood there, a Heckler & Koch MP5 submachine gun gripped tightly in his hands. His face was a mask of pure adrenaline. "Boss," Dante barked, "we have a breach. 3 SUVs just rammed the front gates. They have heavy ordnance. It's Cassell. Gregor didn't flinch. He reached behind his back, drawing the custom Colt M1911 from his waistband. He looked down at Clara, his eyes burning with an intense, terrifying fire. Dante, get Clara and Lily to the panic room in the sub-basement. Seal the vault. Gregor racked the slide of his pistol, a sharp, metallic clack that echoed in the luxurious room. Nobody touches what is mine. The Romano estate's deceptive tranquility was shattered in an instant. Automated lockdown sirens shrieked, quickly drowned out by the deafening roar of automatic gunfire erupting across the front lawns. Clara sprinted down the gilded hallway, gripping Lily's hand fiercely. Dante led their frantic descent toward the sub-basement, his MP5 raised. The air rapidly thickened with the acrid stench of cordite. At the panic room, Dante punched a code into the keypad. The hydraulic bolts disengaged with a heavy thud. Get inside, Dante ordered, pushing them over the threshold. Do not open this for anyone except me or Gregor. If we fall, the vault seals and triggers an extraction team from New York. Keep him safe, Dante, Clara gasped. Dante offered a grim smile. The Reaper doesn't need keeping safe. The other guys do. The steel door slammed shut, plunging Clara and Lily into the humming silence of the bunker. Upstairs, the grand foyer had transformed into a brutal war zone. The mahogany front doors lay in splinters. Castle's men, clad in tactical gear, flooded the entrance hall. Gregor stood exposed at the top of the marble staircase, radiating a calm. He raised his custom M1911, firing 3 shots in rapid succession. 3 of Cassell's point men dropped dead to the marble floor. Hold the choke point! Gregor roared to his enforcers, taking cover behind overturned antique tables. The firefight was deafening, shredding priceless art and pulverizing plaster. Yet, Gregor's tactical mind sensed a fatal flaw. There were too many attackers, and they were flanking the security checkpoints with practiced ease, exploiting the estate's blind spots. Gregor ducked behind a shattered balustrade as bullets chipped the stone. He tapped his earpiece. Lorenzo. Status on the east wing flank. Only static answered him. Lorenzo, report, Gregor commanded, a cold dread pooling in his gut. The rear is clear, boss. Lorenzo's voice finally crackled. We are holding the line. Gregor narrowed his ice-blue eyes. Through the blown-out windows, he saw a distinct flare of tactical lights sweeping through the rear gardens. A breach. Lorenzo was lying. Dante, Gregor shouted, take command of the front. Lorenzo is compromised. They aren't trying to take the house. They're distracting us. Cassell is going for the bunker. Gregor moved like a phantom, sprinting down the secondary servants' staircase. His mind raced with lethal clarity. Lorenzo had been at the table the night Lily arrived. He knew about the girls, and he knew about the ledger. Lorenzo had sold them out. Down in the bunker, Clara sat on the cold floor, rocking Lily in her arms. She hummed a trembling lullaby to drown out the muffled explosions vibrating through the concrete. Suddenly, the keypad outside the panic room chirped. Clara's blood ran cold. The hydraulic bolts began to slowly retract. Someone had the master override code. Clara shoved Lily frantically beneath the steel cot. Do not make a single sound, Lily. Promise me. I promise, Lily whispered, her tiny hands covering her mouth. Clara grabbed a solid steel fire extinguisher from its bracket, pressing her back against the wall beside the door frame. Her heart hammered violently. The heavy door swung open. It wasn't Gregor. It was Lorenzo, gripping a suppressed Glock 19. Just behind him stood Victor Cassell himself, a vicious man with a heavily scarred face and a sneer of absolute malice. Well, Cassell rasped. Arthur Pendleton's beautiful collateral. Where is the brat? Clara swung the fire extinguisher with every ounce of desperate strength she possessed. The heavy cylinder slammed into Lorenzo's wrist with a sickening crunch. The capo shrieked, his gun clattering to the floor. Before Clara could ready another swing, Cassell lunged. He backhanded her brutally with brass knuckles. The force lifted Clara off her feet, throwing her across the room. She crashed into the metal shelving, stars exploding in her vision as blood poured from her split brow. Stupid bitch, Cassell spat, stepping over a groaning Lorenzo. He pulled a serrated hunting knife. I'm going to carve you to pieces, find the kid, and leave you both for Romano. Cassell grabbed Clara by her hair, dragging her to her knees, and raised the jagged blade. Victor. The voice sucked every atom of oxygen out of the room. Castle froze, turning his head slowly toward the doorway. Gregor Romano stood there, coated in white plaster dust and crimson blood. His eyes were completely void of humanity, replaced by the hollow, endless black of an apex predator. Castle dropped Clara's hair, scrambling desperately for Lorenzo's gun. He didn't make it. Gregor moved with blinding speed. He didn't draw his weapon. He crossed the room, clamped his hand around Castle's throat, and lifted the rival boss completely off the floor, slamming him against the concrete wall. You touched what is mine, Gregor whispered. He gripped Cassell's knife-wielding wrist and snapped it with a merciless twist. As Cassell screamed, Gregor drove his knee upward, crushing his ribcage inward, before throwing him violently to the floor. Cassell lay coughing blood. His chest caved in. Gregor calmly unholstered his M1911 and pulled the trigger. The Castle Syndicate was dead. Gregor turned. Lorenzo clutched his ruined wrist, weeping. Gregor, please. Sterling threatened my family. You invited wolves into my home, Gregor said, devoid of emotion. He fired a single shot. Lorenzo slumped dead. The ringing silence was broken only by Clara's ragged breathing. She huddled against the wall, clutching her bleeding head. Gregor dropped his gun. The monster vanished, replaced entirely by the man. He fell to his knees beside her, his hands trembling violently as he reached out. Clara, he breathed, his voice cracking. I'm so damn sorry. Looking at the brutal carnage, and then into his terrified, desperate eyes, Clara realized the truth. He wasn't afraid of death. He was terrified of losing her. The final wall around her heart shattered. He was a ruthless king, but he was hers. She pressed her forehead against his chest. We're safe. Lily is under the bed. Gregor wrapped his massive arms fiercely around her. It's over. Sterling goes to prison tomorrow. The city is ours. From beneath the cot, Lily shimmied out in her yellow raincoat. She didn't cry. She walked over and wrapped her small arms around Gregor's broad back. The Reapers of Chicago had shed an ocean of blood to build their empire. But as Gregor held the woman he loved and the fearless child who had bought his soul, he knew his kingdom had finally found its true foundation. The underworld of Chicago will never forget the day a little girl in a yellow raincoat bought the city's most dangerous man. If you loved this thrilling tale of loyalty, betrayal, and dark romance, hit that like button. Share this story with your friends who love mafia dramas, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more gripping, real-life inspired storytelling. Comment below which twist shocked you the most.